What problem are you solving? The greatest podcast this week that you've ever seen.
That's right.
Welcome back.
Hey guys, how you doing?
I think we're getting bolder. I think it used to be like the greatest podcast today about now we're already in the greatest podcast.
It's called Traction. It's something we should teach people about.
We must have pivoted into.
Does that have anything to do with friction?
It's the
friction, baby.
Yeah. Is it the same? Is it the same or the opposite?
What do you think?
Oh.
Well, if I didn't have traction, my butt wouldn't sit on the seat. But without friction, I could go faster.
You'd slide out your seat.
Whoa, that is like philosophy. Sorry. All right, so I got a question for you, John. No, John.
What's up?
What problem are you solving this week?
Ooh, look at you jumping right in.
What?
Let's see. What problem am I solving this week?
It's like that.
Professionally scaling Agile in spite of it. There's just bureaucracy. People wanted to add more managers, and everyone needs new roles, and we need meetings and stuff. And how do we get people out of their own way? That's a punchline that I use when I help people. I try to help people get out of their own way. And so I'm fighting back against the corporate antibodies who want to add more meetings and add more work and add more managers. So that's a tough problem.
Tracking your mouse. You're tracking mouse movement yet?
Yeah. Well, what company was that like fired people for mouse jigglers? What was that?
Oh,
Dell, wasn't it? No, Dell went back to Office.
It was a financial company. It was like they were figuring out people who did number clicks.
Yeah.
False keystrokes.
Weren't we the ones that
false
talked?
keystrokes?
Wasn't that us? Didn't we break the story? Didn't we? Wasn't that us 2 weeks ago?
Sure.
Or am I losing track?
Of course. It was us. We're just so freaking brilliant.
Ty, what problem are you solving this week?
Well, now that I'm no longer employed, the layoff bug got me, but I negotiated a decent severance. So right now, the problem I'm so associated with that, the problem I'm solving is kind of twofold. What thing do I want to do? Because I'm getting a lot of I know a lot of people, and one of my superpowers is connecting the dots for people, and they're like, "Oh my God!" And so that is one of them. And then I guess the other one is like, what do I want to do when I grow up? Right. So I can connect the dots, but I hate selling stuff, but I love to sell ideas. Ideas are John, I think you said, when ideas have sex, things happen. And so I love the ideas. I love the idea of selling ideas. That's something I'm good at. And so trying to figure out how do I find. Yes, I'm not pimp. You know what I'm saying? Pimp Ty. No. Doesn't happen like that. But no, in all seriousness, how to find. Stop it. I'm trying to do a good
a business model canvas for that industry. What would that look like? Sorry, squirrel.
Ladies and gentlemen,
pivot.
Ladies and gentlemen, Up. You've seen the movie Up. Squirrel. John just did a squirrel. So just trying to figure out how to take what I'm good at and then make it a credible part of developing a business, a lifestyle for me and my family.
Which I have no doubt that you will do successfully because you are an opportunist and you leverage what you're good at. So,
opportunist, Jesus, that makes me sound so weird. A leverager? Yeah,
for sure.
I'm a leverager. I don't.
Adam, problem you solving this week?
What do you?
I got a couple little ones. You ready?
Let's hear it.
All right. I'm trying to get from Royal Oak to Muskegon for the ferry over to Summerfest in this mobility state. taken with the Midwest house. I'm starting to tie these answers into my plug of the week. So trying to get to the ferry by 4:45 tomorrow over to Summerfest, but there's only a 6 a.m. train that gets me there. So you know,
Is that one of those like you have to cross the boat with the chicken and don't want to get eaten by the alligator on the other side?
Yeah. I think I might try to solve that riddle on the boat. Yeah. And then there was a Weekend at Bernie's reference. There's a couple different ways we can slice the boat ride, the interstate boat ride.
Damn, Weekend at Bernie's.
Oh yeah. The ferries. They think the ferry's leaving. And they jump on the boat, but it's actually docking. They think they're late. It's pretty good. We should maybe pull it up.
I forgot that.
It's a pretty clean. Is that a pivot? I don't know. It's a misread. It's a misread of the data, but it's pretty funny.
A misread of the data.
All right, I'm trying to keep my t-shirt game sharp. This is a shout out to Yaniv. I spoke to Yaniv this morning. I got to start keeping track of what I wear. I used to just go data. Starting to get requests. I'm starting to get noticed on the t-shirt game. Maybe not the innovation game, but the t-shirt game. After 10 years, I'm getting noticed. So that's one problem. And then in real world, I'm trying to build an accelerator. I'm trying to take my own advice from the book and build an accelerator. So Ty's got some stuff to do.
So I can eat and pay the mortgage.
Yeah. We want people to eat on both sides, on the mentor side and the early stage side. So we'll talk about that a little later in the summer.
Cool.
Well, great.
It's humbling. It's humbling when your co-author, asks you if you're following the prescription in the book. It was, but I need I have a little homework left to do.
Oops, that's funny. Well, great. So let's see. This week, we wanted to talk about pivots, right? We thought that would be a natural progression for those, as we talked about last time, nascent stage, early baby stage, curious startups, right? How do you start exploring? How do you do that customer discovery? But most importantly, learn when it's time to stop, or specifically pivot to a new experiment or a new set of data. So I think there's lots of experience we all have here on times we've seen it, things we recommend for teams, and other types of pivots. So, Ty, what's an example of a good pivot?
I'm the one that kind of brought this up because I thought it would be a good topic, especially when you consider what we did with we did on the cast last week. Because I'm curious about this idea of how do I know when it's time to stop something, even in a period, even in a time when we're just like, you think that you're onto something, and I'm dealing with one of the startups that I'm working with now, that it started like this huge funnel of ideas, just tremendous funnel of idea. And in the last more than a year, it's been like, and it was interesting to me because this person was like, it was between what when they would go and pitch the idea and would get some data about their idea and would get very specific questions like, where's your numbers, or what's up with your business model, that would cause this person to kind of go, wow, do I really have what I think I have? What was interesting is part of my very first conversation was, I think you have a data issue, not an issue. You have a data opportunity here.
Interesting.
It's like, no, that's not what I'm doing. It's like, trust me. Anytime you're collecting information on people, you have a data thing. And I think where we're at now, it's like, it's almost like chasing a firefly at night. right? You watch it light and you run to it and you go, and you have to stop because otherwise you're just chasing. Exactly, John. You're just chasing a thing and you're running willy nilly versus run, stop, watch where the next light is, run, stop, watch where it lights. And so in my mind's eye, it's kind of like that, right? You got to learn how to stop every once in a while and take
That's
a
a really good
bearing.
metaphor. I love that metaphor.
That's all I got.
Man,
But it really does
done.
feel like, and I can figure out how to pivot. But the question is that I wanted to talk about tonight is how do you know when to stop running? Not stop chasing the firefly, but when do you know to stop running and get a bearing on where it's at? That's what I'm curious about.
But in the metaphor, stopping to see where it's at isn't giving up your startup. So I think we
No,
might be mixing. Yeah, I think I
no,
agree.
not at all. Not at all.
Yes,
Not at
I
all.
agree. And now I have,
Because the goal is to do what? Catch the firefly. But
yes.
you running headlong where you think you're supposed to be going, you could have absolutely missed the firefly at the same time because you ran right past it versus stop. Oh, it's not where I thought it was. It's where it's over here. But the only time I would have figured it out by stopping. Does that make sense, guys?
It makes perfect. I mean, I think we've sort of been dancing around. I think the answer to that question is every 3 weeks and every quarter. I mean, I just think there's no these big pivots and big resets, and we'll get to that later. But when to stop and look is literally is every 3 weeks and every quarter. And if I want to talk, I want to specifically map pivots to customer discovery in this early stage. I think our friend Mike, we'll pull him into this a little. We'll invoke him a couple times. I think there are a lot of resources for early stage and idea stage startups where he was saying there are. I slightly like 1% disagree on that. That no one's talking to early stage startups, but I do totally think that I certainly think that no one has figured out the pivot question as applied to like idea stage and customer discovery. I want to jump in there. I think I have some actual thoughts and opinions on that. But yeah, I think when you stop and look and evaluate every sprint, every single sprint.
Yeah, exactly.
So, John, how do engineers stop? And I'm not suggesting that engineers do full pivots, right?
Yeah.
Because they have a sense of what they want to build already versus a startup, which is like in search. I was just listening to a quick piece by Steve Blank. He was in Istanbul, and he was saying, a startup is not a large company trying to figure out something. It is a small temporary organization who's in the throes of, I know I have an idea, but I have no idea where it's at. So it's very different. And I'm thinking about how engineers, because I don't think, and maybe Adam, this is what you're talking about. If we over engineer our pivots versus just doing the pivots, you could build a really good thing that nobody wants because you're so certain you're pivoting with certainty about the thing you're trying to build, or
Right.
not pivoting. I'm sorry, stopping. Look for the fireflies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just
I'm
add
just
that I know
curious.
that, like, one thing that comes to mind too. Traditional engineers, not more of your or more flexible engineers, would do prototypes, right? They would try to build a prototype first, which is not the same as an MVP, right? It is purely a functional test to see if the thing can perform as functioned, but not necessarily considering desirability and viability as well, right? So your traditional engineers may functionally test something and then decide it either worked or didn't, in which they would either double down or they throw it away, right? The goal being prototypes being disposable. But yeah, we three would advocate for a different approach as well.
I think also at that stage, we're going to get into trouble trying to pivot and the isolation of variables with the recognition of the whole full business model. So maybe we'll fix that next week. But yes, and that's I'm thinking like there are no pivot. Pivots are the are the compounding of iterations. Like there are no real pivots, especially in that when you're just tinkering.
Yeah, when you're tinkering and you don't, yeah,
It's not a pivot, like you're not pivoting. And I think I don't want to spend the whole hour, sort of getting into the word and changing. Well, let's go back. Let's pull it up somewhere. I think, as usual, it was either Eric or Steve or Alex or Ash or one of those. Change in strategy without a change in vision. Is that what we're? I should know
Mhm.
that.
No, keep going. Keep going.
Well,
You're
I
on to
think I
something.
think that I think that is it. So I don't want to I don't want to spend too much time defining a pivot. Um, I do want to visit on the second half of this call. I think for an actual startup who has customers, beyond the nascent stage that we were talking about last week, um, whether you call it a reset or the board, like there are once in a while, or there are like those hard decisions in markets where you need to, fire people, hire people, choose a real different place to play, where to win to kind of build off some
Mhm.
of our episode. I don't think that's a helpful conversation, and this is why we want more guests and more audience. I want the real time feedback rather than the chuckleheads, as Ty says. But I do think I can be helpful um, in the customer discovery phase of pivoting. But I want you to answer. Let's close the loop on the tinkering, the engineering question, and then yes, I'm gonna force in some customer discovery level pivoting versus iterating. But I'll save it for a couple minutes.
It's I had a thought as you were talking, Adam, about um w- the not the tinkering, right? But this engineering thing, slip that. The thought I had was, do where if we use the business model canvas, if you have those 9 boxes that we know about, either the traditional one developed by Alex, or the iterative one that was developed by the iteration that was developed by Ash, is there can you are there indicators in each one of those boxes that will be a signal to pivot? Does that make sense what
So
I'm asking?
I think it makes perfect sense. I think, and it's kind of where I was headed, but you didn't know that.
Okay.
Is John still with us?
I don't
Sit
know.
down.
But let's talk.
I
Let's
have an
round
answer for
something.
the leaner canvas in terms of, so you got the early adopters, you got the big market, you got the top right, bottom right.
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
All right. Thank you, John. I
Is
think
that me?
Adam, you're kind of Adam, you were kind of there he goes. And so I'll just so John, while we're waiting for him to come back. So my question is, if we have these first 7, these top 7, and as we're buying down the risk of each one of these, right? So if I look at the who my customers are, and I'm taking and we know in the canvas in the very beginning, I don't know, it's a lot of uncertainty, and I just
A
lay
lot of
out who my
unknowns.
customers.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of unknowns. There's huge amounts of guesses, or the customer relationships, or any one of these boxes. And I know that you and I have talked to people about, just lay out your assumptions in each one of these, thinking about the thing that you're going after.
Yep.
And then you say, if I had to rank, what do we say? Rank order, no ties,
Mm-hmm.
and not, no pun intended.
Ha.
Yeah, there you go. That I have to rank order those to figure them out. As I buy down the risk, or as I test my way through my cost, or I'm wondering if what would be the indicators. Maybe that's what, we bring somebody like David on. We say, here are the tests that you want to conduct to figure
Mm-hmm.
out whether it's time to pivot. So do I have a crap load of customers, and I'm testing that, and something happens and makes me go, whoops, I got the wrong. So literally, the startup that I'm working with had everybody who wants to do. Let me where did I get my hands. Everybody who wants to do this, and now it's like a very narrow pivot. But what happened is it opened up an entire set of revenue, a whole revenue stream, or potential revenue streams that had not been considered when it was huge. Adam, what we'd said was, I don't know if you heard it, but but knowing that we have the canvas, it's fine. And that when we go in, because of the high uncertainty, we're trying to figure out what's in each one of these 7 boxes. And at some point you rank order them, no ties and no pun intended, right? Each one of those, and you say, every time I test is the test, and maybe that's when we bring David on to say, David Bland, we say, hey, is that what tests are for? To help us figure out when we pivot? I don't know.
No,
All
I
right,
like.
so let's-
Go ahead, Adam. Jump in.
No, you go. I'm ready. Go ahead.
Well, I'm gonna vamp off of what you said, because you said something that I enjoyed, which was making a hard decision, right? It's not just we're gonna try to experiment. It's we're actually going to make a hard decision. Hopefully, it's an easier decision because it's based on data, and you do an A/B test, and B way outperforms A. That should be an easy decision. However, emotionally, that might be a hard decision. There was a here's a good example, and this is one that we've used in the past. If you've ever eaten at a little chain of restaurants called Potbellies, they actually did a very hard pivot early in their founding, because they were an antique store first. And what they noticed was they happened to be selling sandwiches as well. And one day they looked at the cash register and they found out they were selling more sandwiches than they were antiques. And they had to make a hard decision to pivot and say, we're not in the antique business anymore. We are actually more profitable if we do a product pivot. Keep the same customers, because they're already coming in. They're already walking in the door, but they're buying more sandwiches. We're not pivoting different customer segments. We are now pivoting the product to sell more sandwiches, which is why there's antiques all over the walls now anytime you go into a Potbellies. So that's a classic definition of like a good business pivot. You can't do both. So they made the economic choice to change their strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
What were you going to say, Adam?
I was going to say a couple things. I was going to go back to the David Bland question and say, if it's a change in strategy versus and not a change in vision, then even though my intuition says no, it's not a pivot every time you make it. If it's a change in strategy after each experiment, technically it is a pivot. So that was my first. We can go back and forth on, but I do like. It's kind of fun to talk about these big business pivots where you're pivoting maybe the objective or the entire business model. The Instagram is another one. Twitter is the classic one where they were doing something internal, or what was the other one that was a video game? Might have been Twitter.
Flickr.
Right?
Flickr.
Yes, Flickr.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So
people were sharing photos in a video game.
Where early stage startups get frustrated with this conversation is when it's like, well, yes, of course. And Instagram's another one. It was like, or Foursquare, I think it was. Like they had 4 features, and if you're good at your job at all, and you're looking at revenue, and 80% of your revenue comes from one place, yes,
right.
The zoom in, pivot, and double down there. Like that's an easy decision to go count cards at the casino. Like you already have that, you're established. It might be, like philosophically difficult, or your culture might be like, oh, but we're an antique store. But from a business standpoint, from a strategy standpoint, I don't even think that those are after we get through some of these fun pivots, we'll go down memory lane and we'll look them up. I do want to go back because I think that's what's more helpful at the strategic level of like week over week, customer interview over customer interview, value proposition pivot, like experiment pivots. I think that is much more helpful, maybe. But yeah, John, show us what you got while I find a hotspot.
Oh yeah, I wanted to find the at least the Reese definition that a pivot is a structured course correction designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis about the product, strategy, and engine of growth. Right? So you could pivot the product, you could pivot strategy, you could pivot growth, but either way, it's a new fundamental hypothesis, not just should we change the icon from blue to red. That is not a fundamental hypothesis. We're talking about major shifts in the business. As Adam was saying, when it actually forces you to make a business decision rather than just going from good to great.
I have not seen this particular, and probably did, because it's the Eric Ries book, and I'm supposed to have read it.
It's been a long time since I've read it.
Yeah. But a structured course correction. Structured course correction. That to me assumes that you were headed somewhere, right? I think by those structured course correction, I'm headed somewhere to test some fundamental guess about my thing or where I'm going or how I'm going to grow. Right? So layman's terms, take out the big, the I don't want to say the fancy words, but the words that are more complicated, because it's a half academic, half business book. But is that when I think pivot, I think it was something that Adam said that was, it made me go, I think you did that too. You went like this, like there's no fun. I think he said something about there's no fundamental. Adam, if you're back, how did you say that there's no, you didn't say no such thing, but it felt like you said something about a pivot. You were like, how did you say that?
I don't think they exist. It's at the start of anymore.
That's
In established businesses where you have customers and you have a board and you have funding and you're running out of money and when you are actually starting up, and I'm aware of my my flickering here, but we'll deal with that. I don't think they're a pivot. I don't think. I think they are incremental. They're cumulative.
That's what you said.
Yeah, they are an accumulation of
iterations
of changed experiment, changed strategies, and failed experiments, doubling down on succeeding experiments. But yes, if it's a change, yes, if it's non-fundamental and you change a strat and you change an experiment, but you don't change the objective, technically that's not a pivot. But over time, I think if you keep changing that stuff, you might end up in an entirely different place.
So if an accumulation, okay, so I'm going to not take you to task, but I'm going to challenge your hypothesis about this a little bit. So if you look at the business model canvas, and each time my very first pass on it, hold on one second. My very first pass on it is, man, she's calling me in the middle of Jesus. One of my founders just calling me just out of the middle of nowhere, but that's okay. My very first pass on the experiments is just a bunch of guesses. And if it's an accumulation, every time I learn something, what I hear you saying that as I'm looking at this canvas and I buy down the risk of every single one of these guesses, that's an accumulation until such time that half, 2/3 of each one of these boxes has significantly changed. I am now in a position as a startup to pivot whoop. Although my goal is to have a sustainable business. So is that a flicker? Flicker changed a significant number of these boxes. Whatever was evidence for them to go, man, we ain't where we thought we was.
So I think that's pull up the startup. Now we're jumping around a bunch, but pull up the Startup Commons definition of a startup. I think it's like -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. I think it totally depends. I think it sort of goes back to what I was saying before. I don't see a lot of startups buying down all 7 or 8. I think in y'all's line of work, as you like to say, like the corporates and established companies still have a business model that they are buying down the risk. They have a team of people. They have a boss who understands the business.
I'll push back on that for H1, but if you have an R&D organization that's doing startup like entrepreneurship, all that is off the table.
So, John, before
Meaning,
you're also gonna have to identify for the audience what an H1, 2, and 3
Mhm.
is, just in case, because there's gonna be some people listening like, I have no
Right.
idea what he just said. So, I'm
Yeah.
sorry,
So,
Adam.
to tweak that, yeah, that may be true, Adam, if Coca-Cola is trying to introduce a new product line in a different geographic area. Okay. Right. Not that big of a risk, and they kind of know the soda business, right? But if Coca-Cola is trying to find like is trying to make dissolvable mouth tablets that give you the flavor of soda, so but that you can, take it when you go camping. Now it's lightweight, so you don't need to carry bottles of soda around. You can just have a flavor tablet.
so
Um,
something you're not telling us about one of your
I don't know.
clients?
I'm kind of curious now. To the canvas. Um, but yeah, that would be a not a standard product line, which they would then have to treat as a startup with inside their own business and do all the same experiments, validation, etc.
Yes, and in which case, if you break this down level by level, I think you wind up back at the leaner canvas. You wind up back at a problem to solve in a group of customers. You wind up back
Absolutely.
at last week's conversation, which is I should have just, and I think there, week over week, all you can say about the result of your sprint is that you were talking to the wrong customer, you were talking to the right customer and they had the problem, talking to the right customer and they didn't have the problem, or you did a bad interview. You do you agree with that?
Or help me out, because I'm wondering where the product fits in here too. Because sometimes, not always, but sometimes we all like to start with desirability, but sometimes you may have a product in search of a customer with that problem, and that may be validated or invalidated as well.
So I think immediately you almost have to treat that. I love how Ash brings in, the Fermi business, and so
Yeah.
this is what I said we were going to get stuck in. That either you're testing one of those things, and ultimately you're always testing one. You might do a back of the napkin for all three,
Sure.
but at the end of the day, you're really only testing as much as the business model canvas tries, and I love it still as a tool. I don't see a lot of teams using it to successfully de-risk their entire business model, quarter over quarter in real time. I feel like they're breaking it down. I feel like feasibility, desirability, and it's the same thing. So I'm not knocking either tool. Um, but yes, if you have an idea for a product, then yeah, you're already getting into value proposition testing. And in which case, if it doesn't work, you can only change then your channel, your customer, or your value proposition, right? So I still think you have to take these things one at a time based on the stage of the company. Otherwise, you just get lost every time. So I think if you do have a product in mind, so with engineering, you just focused on feasibility and it has to either work or not, and you're iterating until it works. Full stop. It's 100% feasibility. There's
Right.
no desirability and there's no
A lot
viability,
of risk, obviously,
but
but
there's all risk, and you're sitting in a lane, and
yeah,
there's no pivot there. It's constant iteration. So that's
correct.
one full scenario. Okay. An early stage startup with an idea that maybe, yes, the idea came from a solution, but who's willing to do customer discovery. In that case, if you're doing a leaner canvas, yes, there was you again, all four, the alternatives are based on the solution, but yes, we do give advice. What problem are you solving, and who's your customer? So in that case, the only things that you can look at is either the wrong problem or the wrong customer or a
I
bad
like it.
interview.
Yep.
Okay, so that's how you knock, and that's sort of what I wanted to get into, where we ended up on the last call, which was ties, like how many is enough? Is 100 interviews enough? And I knew that Ty was going to get there. That 5 is enough if you have the right, if your customer segment is similar and the problem statement is similar, and you have plus ones for the customer to problem instead of zeros or negative ones. That is where you are starting to build a solution. So that's when you stop pivoting, right? So until you get there, you're pivoting either the customer or the problem or the interview technique. In my opinion, that's a new one. I have to like kind of work that out. Then when you get to so that's full stop, customer discovery, problem, customer, pivoting. A business model canvas, yes, that's the full business. I haven't seen it done that way when it's just, yes, that's the classic pivot where you're looking at everything but I've never seen it come as a result of experiments. More like we're running out of time, we're running out of money, people are quitting, or the environment changes, and we have to make a hard decision. And then I'll land in the last scenario, which is value proposition testing. You're either changing the value proposition, the customer, or the channel. You're getting to them the wrong way, and that's also a good segue to now go. I love that a couple episodes ago when we went through the whole episode was structured on a list. Let's pull up the zoom in, zoom out pivots, because I think that'll ground this conversation. And then we can map those kinds of pivots for the stage of the enterprise or the.
So, something happened with my laptop or the signal. I don't know. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. And so thank you. So I was just before it cut out, I was just thinking, Adam, about there's no such thing as a pivot. I mean, your proposition, there's no such thing as a pivot. And I know in those 2 minutes you had a very eloquent, explanation of why that is, and I trust that you did. But I am curious about, like, is it there's no such thing as a pivot, or you're always in the process of learning more, to such end that what you had going in is no longer effective to make money or to provide value? Because I want to put those on the same side, because we may have people in here like, I don't sell anything, Ty. We just do mission. Okay, cool. If that's effective, fine. You do whatever you do. You just ain't into making money.
Time for a mission pivot.
Yeah, exactly. That ain't working no more. We gotta do something else. Because I think ultimately that's what it comes down to, right? I am in the process of figuring out, do I keep going till I'm like, yo, this math ain't mathing no more. In a little more country, this dog ain't hunting. So I need to go figure out something different, because it's costing me more to I'm doing than the value that's being extracted, either for me or for the customer. And if that's the case, that's stupid to continue down that path.
Are all ultimately are all pivots, which are a culmination of experiments and results, are all pivots value pivots? In other words,
So-
does it come down to financials at the end of the day, or could it be something
I
else?
never said financials. That's why I always
I know
speak about
what you
value.
mean.
Okay.
But
All right.
even cost per unit value.
Which, by the way, Adam, you won't find anywhere else. At least I haven't been able to find anywhere else outside of probably some economics literature where people talk about cost per unit value.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, all pivots are on either hard value data or perceived. Yeah, it's either in a value proposition, the assumption of the problem, or the actual business growth.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah, or the equivalent at your organization.
Right.
Because a failed experiment or a there were no failed experiments, but yeah, there are.
Oh, yeah. Lots of failed experiments.
Yeah, 100%. Right?
I think so. I'm trying to run through when would you pivot for something that's not something that is fundamental for sustainability of a business.
I mean, you might just get bored. I mean, you get
Yeah,
bored
because
of
then
something.
it's not technically a pivot at that point. Ty?
So this won't fully answer, but this is something I learned along with a young woman who is building an AI product, right? And she's busting balls on me. She's just knocking it out, this product. And then I sent her Competing Against Luck by Clay Christensen. And she was like, she literally drove from St. Louis to Washington, D.C. And she said, I had to pull over several times just to make sure I wrote down what I just heard. Right. First of all, I was like, uh, sweetheart, why would you drive from Anastasia? Why would you drive from St. Louis to D.C.? And then she just drove back.
Because there's no ferry.
Because there's no ferry.
Exactly why.
I thought she was going to drive from St. Louis to go hit Ty with the book that he recommended.
Meanwhile, he's the one that's frozen. I think we can get him on the. We don't challenge each other when we miss a word, but the Princess Bride. I don't think that word means. Ballbusters is. I think you meant gangbusters. I think we got to get the Princess Bride.
Nice.
I do it all the time too, but that was good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, where do you go? Let's go back to our list while we get him back.
All right, so let's say you were zooming in and zooming out. A zoom in pivot versus a zoom out pivot.
All right, so
zooming in. In this situation, a single feature becomes the whole product, and everything else in the product is cut away.
So this is the Instagram. You need a product. Doesn't matter what stage you're at. You need a product. This is your Instagram situation. This is even your Potbelly situation.
Yes, mm-hmm. Could be. Mm-hmm.
That is a classic zoom in pivot, and I think those are, we'll fly through this list, but zoom in and zoom out. I think actually zoom in is much more straightforward than a zoom. I don't know. Do we have any good examples of zoom out pivots, because it's easier to see the whole field, see something that's working, and pick the thing that is working and double down.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I said even before, and obviously I looked at this list before. What are some good examples of zoom out pivots? Do we have any? If we're running out of time, we can come back to it and get through the list.
Yeah, let me chew on that for a bit.
All right, so
go ahead.
No, I was going to try to fly through this because the customer needs something. This is why, we, like David Bland, we need a live whiteboarding, or we need to kind of like put ourselves, because yes, there's a bunch of different scenarios. It's either we always go back to like the corporate level or the government level or a true startup. And then even as a startup, there's different stages. So it depends. It always depends. A customer segment pivot to me is the most interesting thing. Okay. So it's like, you can have a customer segment pivot where Mike and I are talking about, where it's like literally going out, spending a week or even a day at a startup weekend kind of a thing. I have a hypothesis. I don't have a solution in mind. I don't have a product.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing pure problem discovery or problem validation. And I know the problem I want to solve. And I'm doing interviews, and it's not, it's not teachers, it's principals, right? I've seen that over and over again. I think that's where we can be most helpful with some of the people we have on the show. Mm-hmm. Customer need, I would say, is just the inverse of that is the problem, right? So you're changing the customer, you're changing the problem. So that's kind of why I wanted to come back to this list. And then you could do that also at a later stage where, you have your classic early adopters, you've broken into the market, you do have a product. But that, the customers who got us here are the customers who are getting us there, and you have to fire your original customers. And there's all those kinds of, stories of people getting pissed off, frankly, that we supported you, now you're changing. And it's like, yeah, but you can sort of see, why the company needs to sort of abandon their initial. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a good example of a zoom out pivot now that I think about it. Amazon.com used to only sell textbooks.
It is a great example, yes.
And so it was niche, and they realized once they got validation, they can now zoom out to sell more things.
Well, so yes, and now this is our episode of bouncing around in technical difficulties, but is that just number 8? I guess you're not changing the engine of growth, but is that just growth? I don't know. Is it a pivot? Is it just growth? I went, all right, so we'll come back to that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put some stuff in the show notes. Yeah, I think the value capture pivot is one, or at least value proposition, then value capture pivot is something that can be done at all stages and all groups. So I mean, would you say that that's a business model pivot, or is that purely a value capture?
An engine of growth?
No, sorry, value capture pivot.
Value capture. Yeah, it seems like to me just a viability pivot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ty.
I don't know what's happening. I appreciate you guys carrying on without me. I don't know. It just the whole thing just went flat on me. Continue on. I'll jump in where I can. Appreciate you.
So yeah, I think the engine of growth is a pretty straightforward pivot, right? Like, although the more you learn about, they're kind of mutually exclusive. So the more you learn about, like, I remember examples like, oh, this is a private, this is not a referral model. Like, people are never going to tell their friends. Your choices are sort of limited to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that one's a stretch. We'll come back to that one. I'd like to see. All right, we're gonna have to write something. This is one that might be. This is where the chuckleheads are gonna have to like write some stuff down and deliver some more value to this episode, where we go through, because yes, there's, for each kind of pivot, there's multiple stages, multiple organization types, multiple
Right.
experiments. So it's hard. I didn't want to just spend the hour talking about the Instagram story. I think the Potbelly one was a good addition to that list.
Got any good real world examples of just pivots in general? Whether it's kind of related to that list or just other things in your experience. Where have you seen pivots both fail and be successful?
So to bring it back to last week
and jump into yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was just making space while we were. What I want to see, what I want to start documenting over the next year, especially when this new accelerator that Ty and John and I are starting, and the rest of our friends. I think it's very interesting to watch early stage startups doing customer discovery and hear people, when they're doing it correctly, know that they're talking to the right person, but they have the wrong problem, and they keep hearing the same different problem arise over and over again. So the customer need pivot. Or nope, they're sure that this is a problem that they want to solve, and it's the wrong customer. Like, that customer just doesn't have that human group just doesn't have that. Like, to me, that is the lane that I want to stay in, and that's what I think that's what the graph from last week is. So I think all this stuff is super interesting, but the examples for me are going to stay in and then in some ways, go back to listen, and we'll let Ty talk for it, and we'll read us a bedtime story. Not the value capture pivot.
So
not to zoom out.
I have one a fail. In fact, I have several, and I think one that comes to mind most was I had a startup that I was working with that this dude was like, I got it. I know exactly the problem I'm going to solve.
I love those.
I'm going to do this, and all I need is, I don't know how much money to build this machine. And the first thing I was like, dude, how do you know? Because my relatives had this, and I've seen friends, and people say they love it because it's a great idea. And went and spent a ton of money to go, that's not what I want. Oop, nobody wants that. And then pivoted. I mean, it wasn't even, it felt at times it was like an ADHD pivot, right? It was like, no, I know what the problem is. It is, we need this thing, this piece of hardware to make the thing, to get to the stuff that we really want to get to. And I was like, why would you want to do that? Because he didn't have the conversation, Adam. I think you're asking to buy down the risk inside of his business model of, maybe you should just partner with somebody and like go after the stuff that's really important. And I mean, was completely convinced that all he had to have was this hardware and somebody was going to buy it. That's all.
Wow.
And literally it was a data play. Literally was a data play, but got so down in the weeds. And it gets back to before my computer just went nuts on me. It gets back to, you're asking, did you ever see people do a pivot that was not based in financials? Well, this one wasn't, because it couldn't have been, because he was so certain that it was a social, we have the 3 jobs to be done. Because I was talking about Clay Christensen, social, function, emotional. He's like, I know this functional thing will make it happen. And it felt very much like the milkshake. We want it like thicker, chewy, chunky, flavorful, and it never got to the point. And so I was working with this cat for like 8 months, and he gets to an accelerator, like, so what's the story? Like, the why? And he really forced him like down to really understand why he was even doing it. And it got to like, oh, that's not what I want. And then he went back to the drawing board, and then he came out with something else that was like, dude, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then it felt like giving away the store when I looked at the cap table. And so for those that may or may not be listening to this, the cap table is like, how are you dividing up the if you had 100 pennies, who's getting the pennies and who's helping you with the pennies to build out your business? And so I got the person I got, the person I got, this person I got, 3 PhDs, and I'm like, but you don't know what you got yet.
Yeah, you haven't built
you
anything.
don't need all that.
Once yet. Yeah.
Like, dude, just collect some information, throw it in Chat GPT, do a little prompt engineering, and like, hey, good enough. By the way, I'm really starting to like the generative AI thing, considering I'm now on the board of a quantum company, supporting them. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm on the board of a quantum company trying to help them figure it out. Like, are they asking the right questions? So I'm there, and I'm learning how to answer the right questions. And so that for me was like a pivot that failed, or some sense of pivots that failed. To your point, Adam, just doing it like these compiled iterations that felt like, I'm going to go back to the beginning, a little kid chasing a firefly and just running. And every once in a while they'd see a light, and they would just run to it. Just a random run, just all over the place. As a soccer dad, it was the kids shaking a soccer ball. Just running after the soccer ball.
Well, the fireflies is such a great metaphor, because it's like, they don't even need to chase the same one. They like that,
Yep. Exactly.
The sort of, I don't know the term, but it's like, yeah, this sort of arbitrary pivot that you're just trying a bunch of different shit and throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. Like that, I did that for years with Navarro, and we did that, and it was like, technically they were customer segment pivot. We went from college students, oh, they need to borrow stuff because they don't have any money, but those are, or apartment buildings because they're all close together, so it solves the logistics, or universities because they, or corporates because they all trust each other more, so they have that. But none of that was based on data. It was just based on hope. So I do think there's a difference between pivoting based on like data and learning and usage and intelligence versus like, Ty, what you were just talking about, which is just blind. It's not pivoting, it's just running. It's just chasing waterfall. Don't go chasing fireflies.
Well, I know we got to wrap up soon, but it's interesting that you would I had a thought. Oh, you were asking about that. The ones I gave was like this. It's like a real startup. But John, you and I know of a of a conversation. I've shared this in other public spaces because it's just a public story. But the U.S. Army goes into Afghanistan and puts a well, the best placed well that they could find. Right? It was beautiful. The water was pristine. It was close to the thing, and nobody used it. Why? Because they didn't have enough information about why people went to the well. The women who were charged with going to the well would go away from the village or away from the compound to go collect water because it gave women their personal time versus being around their husbands. It was a pivot based on what they thought was good data, right? Good functional data. Exactly.
It's got water. What's wrong with it? Why aren't you all
Just go and use
hanging
it
out at
right
the well?
there?
Yeah.
It's like 100 feet from the compound. When the other well was like 1,000 or 1,500 feet from the compound, but it served something functional. And so it was a fail. It was completely impractical for all practical purposes. Absolutely the right thing to do and it ended up failing miserably. Because I think, humans are illogical on top of it. We're completely illogical.
Most of the time, yes.
Yeah. So why do they have marketing? If we were completely logical, we wouldn't need marketers.
Yeah,
Because
we
we're
were just
appealing to
optimally find the
optimization.
right solution.
Yep. It's the cheapest thing out there. And my wife, for the longest time, would not go to Aldi's or Lidl's because she thought it was cheap food. And now she's like, let's go over there. You can look at it, there's no GMO in it. Let's go over there. Oh, Green Giant got all kinds of GMO. I don't know.
Optimally, if you want to go listen to other episodes, head to youtube.com/@whatpays to get the whole series of nascent startups, all sorts of good stuff.
So we're going to do this next week too, guys. Because the week of the 4th of July.
I got some special guests lined up.
Oh, snap. Your turn, huh?
I'm actually going to deliver, so,
Oh,
hold me to
okay.
that.
Ooh,
Where's that mic I can
Ooh.
drop? Where is it?
that's right. Now I hear a challenge. That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing challenge.
You need to pivot to a removable mic.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
word. All right, Adam, final thoughts on Pivot Scope.
I'm sticking to it. I think it's just tinkering. It's iterating. It's learning. It's there's small changes. There are no big pivots. I don't think for now. For early stage startups.
All right, I'll roll with you there, Ty.
I'm going to concur with Adam. The study of dynamic system change is literally about small iterative changes to have big consequence, but big changes usually produce nothing. I'm going to defer to you, John. Whatever's the law that large change comes from small iterations, or if you want to change something, there was some engineering principle.
Yes,
You know what I'm talking about? So what I'm going to walk away with is agreeing with Adam about that pivots at the early stage is a series of understanding that their world is not what they thought it was. It's that cumulative effect that made them go like, oh crap, we ain't yeah, we better do something pretty quick. We're gonna run out of money.
Nice.
That was mine.
Yep. I like it. That was Gall's law. A complex
Gall's
system
law.
that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that worked. A complex system designed from scratch never works and cannot be patched up to make it work. You have to start over with a working, simple system. So go simple, go quick, go fast, go cheap, learn, and then you can pivot your way to a better outcome.
Love it.
That's a good way to close it. Remember, don't just chase fireflies. Catch them with data.
Chase water.
Oh, look it. He got fireflies. Where's the cup? Daddy,
See you next time.
Daddy. See ya.